Part 3, Derivative Sex Attributes. In addition to the primary attributes or characteristics of sex which you have considered in the preceding section of this book, there are certain secondary or derivative sexual attributes or characteristics which you are now asked to consider in the present section. By derivative attributes are meant those characteristic qualities which are not primary or original, but which are secondary, incidental and obtained by derivation. In short, those characteristic qualities which flow and proceed from the primary, original, and fundamental nature of the thing under consideration, which thing in the present instance is sex. First among the secondary or derivative characteristics or attributes of sex is that known as sexual dimorphism, or the distinction of form and physical appearance of the two sexes of certain species. An authoritative reference work contains the following reference to this subject. Sexual dimorphism is due to the rise of secondary characters. Such features are the male lion's mane, the horns of the buck, the gay plumage which distinguishes the cock from the hen, and the plumes, colored combs and wattles, top knots, brilliant, conspicuous bands and regenerative power spots, spurs, and those markings or new plumage especially developed during the breeding season. Males tend among vertebrates to be larger, they lead the flock, guard the females and young in character they are more jealous and pugnacious. This is the case not only with mammals and birds, but with reptiles and frogs. The vociferous cries in spring of frogs and toads are mainly from male throats, the females being much less noisy. Certain fishes, such as the salmon, during the breeding season, are distinguished by bright colors and ornamental appendages. Of the invertebrates only insects, spiders, and Crustacea afford examples. Among Coleoptera the stoga beetles are remarkable for their size and the enormous jaws and horns of the males, and there are two sets of males, those which in lack of armature resemble the females, and those which are much larger and remarkably aberrant, i.e., deviating from type. In certain spiders the males are gaily colored and their legs greatly modified in shape. Darwin has explained sexual dimorphism by his theory of sexual selection. Sexual dimorphism reaches its acme in the males of certain solitary barnacles. They are minute, very much reduced in structure, living inside the mantle cavity of the female, where they are anchored by their antennae. The same authority explains the above reference to sexual selection as follows. The principle of sexual selection depends, as Darwin states, not on a struggle for existence, but on a struggle between the males for possession of the females. The result is not death to the unsuccessful competitor, but few or no offspring. In many cases, however, victory depends not on general vigor, but on the possession of special weapons confined to the male sex, as the spurs of the cock or the horns of the stag. The war is perhaps severest between the males of polygamous animals, and these seem oftenest provided with special weapons of offense. Among birds the contest is often less gross and fierce, the males rivaling each other in attracting the females by their powers of song or display of plumage. Derivative sex attributes. Darwin concludes that when the males and females of any animal have the same habits of life, but differ in structure, color, or ornament, such differences have been mainly caused by sexual selection, i.e., by individual males having had, in successive generations, some slight advantages over other males, in their weapons, means of defense, or charms, and having transmitted these advantages to their male offspring. Although Wallace does not accept the theory of sexual selection, claiming that bright colors were originally normal in both sexes, but have been eliminated in the females, yet the facts seem to substantiate the views of Darwin. As observed by Romans, it is a theory wholly and completely distinct from natural selection. Whatever may have been the predominant evolutionary cause leading to this distinctive marking and equipment of the male animals, the fact remains unquestioned that the female animals are attracted by these special characteristics of the male, and bestow their favors upon the attractively marked individual males, the less fortunate males being comparatively discarded. Nature has evolved this means of attracting the sexa element of the females by the special physical appearance or weapons of the male. The manifestation of such characteristics is unquestionably a derivative sex attribute. The attractive male animal succeeds in propagating his kind, just as truly as the attractive flower tends toward greater fertility by reason of being favored by the visiting insects which serve the purpose of fertilization. The primary characteristics or attributes of sex are those immediately or very closely associated with the processes of fertilization, namely, a. the power of producing respectively the sperm and the ova, and b. the possession of the organs necessary for conjugation, oviposition, gestation, parturition and nutrition of the immature young in any stage. The secondary, or derivative characteristics of sex are those which are concerned with the differences between the sexes is size, shape, appearance, ornamentation, armament, color and coloration, voice, and instincts and habits not directly associated with the reproductive processes. The primary or original sexual characteristics or attributes are those which are concerned directly with the sexual act of fertilization. The secondary or derivative sexual characteristics are those which are concerned with the attraction between the individuals of the two sexes, whereby at least some degree of sexual selection is performed in the lovemaking or falling in love of the animals, and in the simpler corresponding processes in plant life. Darwin devoted much attention to these secondary or derivative sexual characteristics in animals, and, as before stated, explained the same by his theory of sexual selection, i.e., the hypothesis that as the females almost invariably select as mates those individual males so attractively marked, these special characteristics thereafter in time become fixed in the male offspring. The unattractive males, having fewer offspring, being unable to exert a corresponding influence on the characteristics of the species. These secondary or derivative sexual attributes or characteristics, however, are not universally present in the animal world. On the contrary, among many mammals, and among many birds, there are no distinguishing marks between the two sexes excepting those of the primary sexual attributes or characteristics, i.e., the reproductive organism itself. But, almost invariably, when such secondary characteristics are found in a species, they are found in the male animal rather than in the female. In many cases the male possesses the attractive markings, etc., only during the mating season, thus showing clearly and unmistakably nature's purpose in manifesting the distinction, and in her use of it. Darwin's theory of sexual selection is well illustrated by the following quotation from one of his books: "Courage, pugnacity, perseverance, strength and size of body, weapons of all kinds, musical organs, both vocal and instrumental, bright colors, stripes and marks, and ornamental appendages, have all been indirectly gained by the one sex or the other, through the influence of love or jealousy, through the appreciation of the beautiful in sound, color or form, and through the exertion of a choice, and these powers of the mind manifestly depend upon the development of the cerebral system." Another authority adds, "The secondary characters to be accounted for are confined to one sex, and are in close relation with the breeding season and the breeding habits. In those cases where they differ from the females, the males are the most active in courtship, and the best armed, and are rendered the most attractive in many ways. They fight with their rivals for the possession of the female, or display their attractions before her, and either by conquest, or being preferred, have an advantage of less favored males." With this understanding of the nature, cause and reason of the many secondary characteristics appearing in the animal world, you will read a new and strange meaning in your experience of the world of living things. You will see the presence of sex in the living world around you, and will see the fine hand of nature manipulating the appearance and actions of all living things in direct relation to the power of sex. Were the activities of sex to be brought to a sudden termination, not only would the world of living things soon die out for want of fresh material, but even while it survived with constantly decreasing force and lessening numbers, it would be a far different, and a far less attractive and less beautiful world than it now appears to be to our senses. The above thought is brought out more clearly in the following quotation from Grant Allen, the English naturalist, who says, "Everything high and ennobling in our nature springs directly out of the sexual instinct. Its alliance is wholly with whatever is purest and most beautiful within us. To it we owe our brightest colors, graceful forms, melodious sounds, and rhythmical motion. To it we owe regenerative power, the evolution of music, of poetry, of romance, of belles lettres, the evolution of sculpture, of decorative art, of dramatic entertainment. To it we owe the entire existence of our aesthetic sense, which is, in the last resort, a secondary sexual attribute. From it springs the love of beauty around it, too, are grouped the paternal and marital relations, the love of little pattering feet and baby laughter, the home with all the associations that cluster around it, in one word, the heart and all that is best in it. If we look around among the inferior animals, we shall see that germs of everything which is best in humanity took their rise with them in the sexual instinct. The song of the nightingale, or of Shelley's skylark, is a song that has been acquired by the bird himself to charm the ears of his attentive partner. The chirp of the cricket, the cheerful note of the grasshopper, the twittering of the sparrow, the pleasant caw of the rookery, all these, as Darwin showed, are direct products of sexual selection. Every pleasant sound that greets our ears from the hedge or copse in a summer walk has the self-same origin. If we were to take away from the country the music conferred upon it by the sense of sex, we should have taken away every vocal charm it possesses, save the murmuring of brooks and the whispering of breezes through the leaves. No thrush, no blackbird, no linnet would be left us, no rattle of the nightingale over the twilight fields, no chirp of insect, no chatter of tree or frog, no cry of cuckoo from the leafy covert. The whippoorwill and the bobolink would be as mute as the serpent. Every beautiful voice in wild nature, from the mockingbird to the cicada, is, in essence, a love vehicle, and without such love vehicles the music of the fields would be mute, the forests would be silent. Had Allen extended his thought to the realm of the plants, he would have been able to have emphasized quite as forcibly our dependence upon the sexual energies and influence of the world of plants, flowers, and fruits. For without sex, there would be no beautiful buds and flowers upon which to feast our eyes. The rose, the lily, the violet, and all the great array of wild and cultivated flowers would be absent from our sight, and their fragrance would no longer delight our sense of smell. No longer would the wealth of cherry blossoms charm us, no longer the perfume of the honeysuckle or lilac, the heliotrope or the sweet pea, refresh us. For these flowers are not only the sexual organism of the plant, but their beauty and fragrance arise by reason of nature's clever plan to attract to them the insects needed to fertilize them, and thus to promote the process of reproduction of their kind. Likewise, absent also would be the delicious fruits and berries, those cleverly designed carriers of the seed of the plants and trees. Gone also would be the nuts, great and small. Missing, likewise, would be the seeds of the wheat, rye, barley, and corn, the grains which form such an important element of our food. Were sex to cease its entire manifestation in plant life for even a single season, all animal life would perish, and, before perishing, we would gaze sadly upon a world robbed of a great portion of its beauty, and of its appeals to sight, taste and smell. These things, so true and important to us, are too close to us to be appreciated. It is only when we consider the effects of their possible absence that we begin to realize the all-important part played by sex in the world in which we live, and move and have our being, even apart from the part it plays in our own personal lives. No less wonderful, no less powerful, is the effect produced by sex upon the emotional nature of living things, upon the desires arising from them, and upon the actions resulting from such desires. Such an important place in our mental and emotional world and in our world of will, does sex occupy, that were she to withdraw or suspend her activities and influence, there would be but comparatively little left for living creatures to feel, to desire, to will to do, and to manifest in action. Directly or indirectly, sex is involved in the greater portions of our feelings, desires and actions of will. Often hidden, sex usually will be found to be present, exerting a potent though silent and subtle influence upon feeling, thought, desire, will and acts. To begin with the lower forms of life in the animal kingdom, we find that even there is to be found the ever-present and ever-active influence of sex in the feelings, desires and acts of the living creature. Not only is exhibited there the primary urge of sex in the direction of manhood and the cooperation of the male and female in the fundamental reproductive processes, but there also are found the derivative manifestations of feeling, desire, and action which are concerned with the protection of the female, the provision of shelter for the mother and the young where this is necessary, and the subsequent defense of the young together with the provision for their food and nourishment. Even the fishes, the insects, and other lowly forms of life manifest the feeling, desire, and will to protect their eggs, and their young offspring. Quite elaborate arrangements are made by these creatures for the future welfare of their offspring, the eggs being placed in close proximity to the food supply, and where they may not readily be destroyed by their natural enemies. Some of the insects place their eggs either upon, or in the bodies of other living creatures, these bodies being the proper food for the young insects when hatched from the egg. One is amazed in reading scientific works upon insect life, such as Faber's for instance, to discover how complex and ingenious are some of the devices of the parent insect directed to this end. Of course, you may say, this is merely instinct, but instinct is but the more or less unconscious habit which has arisen from previous deliberate and conscious action. Moreover, even if it be but instinct, the manifestation of that instinct is accompanied by feeling, desire and will action on the part of the creature. To the insect, as well as to the bird, and as well as to the higher animal, the eggs on the young are objects of intense solicitude and interest. Some insects will die in defense of their eggs, and the fact that birds will often sacrifice themselves in the protection of their eggs or their young is too well known to require argument. If you have ever tried to disturb a setting hen, you will realize the depth and intensity of her affection for her precious eggs, and her ardent desire to cover them and to keep them warm even though she be unconscious of the ultimate object of her endeavors. In birdie life is to be seen the performance of arduous labors in the building of the nest, and in its subsequent protection from natural enemies. The elemental selfishness of the adult birds is overcome by their deep feeling and desire to feed the young when hatched, or, in some cases, to feed the brooding mother bird. In certain species, the male bird alternates with the female in the setting process. Some male fishes watch over and protect the egg nest or place of deposit and shelter. All of these and similar actions are performed simply because the creature wants to, because its feelings and desires prompt such action. For the time being, the instinct of self-preservation is secondary to that of the protection of the offspring, a clear manifestation of sex influence. The mutual attraction, desire for companionship, and love of living creatures for their mates, apart from the attraction of the direct sexual act, undoubtedly arises from the deeper rooted instinct or desire for the protection of the young. This is evidenced by the fact that where the protection of the father animal is not necessary, then there is no sign of love between the parents, and that where such need is the greatest, there is the love between the parents greatest in power and in length of duration. The measure of the love of the mated animals, and of the duration thereof, is directly proportioned to the need of the protection of the young by the parents, particularly by the male parent. The eggs of the spider require no parental care, hence the male and female spiders love only during the moment of actual intercourse. The female frequently devours her mate immediately afterward. The eggs of the bee require no parental care, the neuters attending to this, hence the male drones are put to death after their services have been rendered, and the mother bee, the queen, evinces no interest whatever in her offspring, or in her mates after the act of fertilization is performed. In the case of certain insects, the living substance of the male parent is actually drawn from his body and into the body of the female, not but the dead shell of the devoted male mate being left. The females of certain species of spiders devour their mates after fertilization is effected. The food thus obtained by eating or absorption is employed for the building of the egg substance in the body of the female. Nature is very matter of fact in the love-making of these creatures. There is very little sentiment wasted in the matter, and the flame of passion burns but for a moment, then dies out forever. Snakes and other reptiles which deposit their eggs in a safe place and then leave them, or which bring forth their young fully equipped for life work, usually manifest no affection between the mates following the sexual act, and such creatures seem devoid of paternal affection. Nature evidently does not provide such emotions where they serve no good purpose or need in the reproductive offices and the subsequent protection of the offspring. Most birds, while ardent lovers and devoted mates during the mating and brooding season, and while usually willing to sacrifice themselves for the mate or for their young during that period, lose the mutual affection after the need of that period is past, though in a few exceptional cases the affection continues over longer periods, sometimes even for life. It is claimed the cuckoos and similar birds which deposit their eggs in the nests of other birds, there to be hatched along with the legitimate brood of the foster parents, are inveterate polygamists and polyandrists, cohabiting indiscriminately and showing not the slightest signs of permanent or continued affection for their whilom mates. On the other hand, Those birds and other animals whose young require careful and continued attention always are found to manifest a strong maternal love during the period of that need. Nature has evidently established this rule for the protection of the young, and the continuance of the species. Darwin explains this upon the theory that the ancestral creatures who manifested the necessary maternal love transmitted it to their numerous well-protected offspring, while those not manifesting it had but comparatively few offspring to inherit their unfavorable tendencies. Consequently, the habit and custom soon became set and fixed in the species. Other thinkers, however, while admitting that the rule would work out as Darwin indicated, nevertheless believe that the original impulse was there in the beginning, and that in addition to the survival value of such habits there is also to be taken into consideration an unconscious intuition which manifests in action through instinct, and which gradually becomes set and fixed as habit. In the higher animals, or of such species of them in which the young creatures require the protection and food supplying offices of the male parent, there is often seen a marked and often long continued attachment between the parent animals, and a comparatively permanent companionship even after the mating and breeding season. Among the higher wild animals, mating is often comparatively permanent, sometimes enduring for the life of the two mates, and here, as might be expected, there is to be found a need for such association, for by the time one brood is ready to be cast off to pursue life on their own account, nature has begun preparations for the following brood. This rule is true among the lower races of man, as well, and in about the same degree. The human infant is probably the most helpless thing in the world. It can do nothing for itself except to nurse its mother's breast, and it must even be held up during that performance. Moreover, its period of dependence continues for a long time. So long in fact that its younger brother or sister is held in nature's vision before the first child is ready to do anything much for itself. As might be expected, here we find a comparatively strong and long continued attachment between the parents, even in primitive human society. Here, again, according to Darwin, the survival value of such a custom is great, and soon becomes set and fixed as a habit of the race. As mankind advances in culture, knowledge, and experience, there occurs the grafting of many new and strange mental and emotional growths upon the parent stock of human love for the mate. The original purpose, need and instinct is always there. Nature attends carefully to this, but there exists in addition many new requirements of the emotional nature which often cause the original and elemental urge to be overlooked, at least for a time. As Carpenter says, nature, personifying under this term the more unconscious, even though human, instincts and forces, takes pretty good care in her own way that sex shall not be neglected. She has her own purposes to work out, which in a sense have nothing to do with the individual her racial purposes. But she acts in the rough, with tremendous sweep and power, and with little adjustment to or consideration for the later developed and more conscious and intelligent ideals of humanity. Nordau says, the more highly cultivated, the more original, the more differentiated and individual, the more complex the qualities which he attributes to the longed for and expected individual of the opposite sex. A broken bar, the lower and simpler the ideal, the easier it is for the individual to find the realization of it in corporate form. Hence, common and simple natures fall in love very easily, and find no difficulty in replacing the object of their love by another, while delicate and complex natures find it a long and tedious task to discover their ideal or anything approximating it, in real life, and in giving it a successor if it happens to lose it. Human love between the sexes may be of high or of low degree, of extreme elemental simplicity of character, or of extreme complexity of nature. It may manifest itself in many ways, sometimes the physical manifestation being almost lost sight of for the time being, owing to the power and force of the other elements and factors involved. But, high or low, simple or complex, even in the form of the most ideal platonic friendship, the element of sex is always there, and sometimes that element manifests its force with a terrifying sudden directness and intensity when and where the least expected. In the unconscious of each individual, sex abides in all its power, awaiting its time and opportunity to manifest itself. Those who are wise never lose sight of this fact, the unwise ignore or deny it, and this folly in many cases results in their undoing. Were nature, in her phase and form of sex, to seize her activities, and to withdraw her influence over the feelings, desires, will and actions of mankind, then all of man's feelings, desires, will and actions which result directly or indirectly from sex attraction would cease. Such a change occurring overnight would cause an entirely different world to present itself and experience with the dawn of the new day. 75%, or more, of human action then would have ceased to manifest itself. All the consciousness of differentiation between the sexes then having ceased, all the attractions between the sexes would have come to an end, and all sexual feelings, desires and tendencies toward action, all will and all voluntary action resulting from such feelings and desires would cease to be experienced or manifested by men and women. All would then be practically of one sex, or rather, sexless, in feeling, emotion, will, habits and actions. This indeed would be a new world, a world almost inconceivable to our imagination. In such a world, everything which now causes a man's feelings concerning a woman to be different from his feelings concerning a man, or vice versa, everything which now causes a man to act differently toward a woman than toward a man, and vice versa, all these things would have vanished, and would be remembered but as a dream. A moment's consideration will cause you to realize what tremendous changes this would cause in our world of experience. Everything would be topsy-turvy, inside out, at sixes and sevens. Add to this the loss of the element of love of offspring, the desire to protect offspring, all family life in action, and you would have chaos. Social life, business life, industrial life, art, music, and all else, would be changed beyond recognition, if not indeed be entirely destroyed. Combine into a single, compositive imaginative picture the idea of the withdrawal of sex from the world of plant life, the world of animal life, and the world of human life, and you will begin to realize at least faintly the all-important part played by sex in the processes of nature, and the tremendous force and power exerted therein by sex, as well as the almost infinite extension of the influence of sex throughout all nature and her manifestations. Sex, symbolized as love, not only brings the world of living things into being, but it also keeps that world alive and in action. Well did the old song inform us that it's love that makes the world go round.